This is lesson 10 and we're going to be talking about writing your best code. So in this lesson we're going to be talking about standard compliant markup, semantic elements, proper document structure, syntax organization, organizing code with comments, writing CSS with multiple lines and spaces, proper class names, and shorthand properties and values. So HTML is very forgiving as far as coding languages go. Even if you write poor code, it will still execute and render it with varying levels of accuracy within a browser. So you can be pretty sure that something's going to show up on the page even if your code isn't very good. Successful rendering does not mean that the code is semantically correct or guarantee that it will validate as standards compliant. So there is a standard that is applied to websites across the World Wide Web, and that's through the W3 consortium. There are different code checkers that you can run your code through should you need to validate your code. And it's a good idea to always validate your code because it will look for little mistakes like a missing quotation mark or a missing equal sign or a slash. And it will help you write code that is really solid and will appear consistent across many different types of browsers. If you write poor code, it's going to be unpredictable. You can't be certain what the result will be when it's rendered in a browser. So in the first place, go ahead and just pay really close attention when you're writing HTML code. Be sure to nest and close all elements correctly. And whatever type of organization works well for you, go ahead and use that, but you need to be super organized. You can use tabs to nest things, so if you want to tab over when something is nested, it makes a little bit more sense to you when you're just viewing a chunk of code. Use IDs and classes appropriately, so you'll use IDs only once per page, and classes you can use multiple times. And always validate your code, so you should run it through a code validator before you publish it. Validating means checking that it is properly formatted and does not contain errors. By validating HTML code, syntax errors can be easily identified, and you can ensure that the code is neat and effective. So let's go over a couple examples. So here's an example of bad code. See if you can figure out what's wrong with it. So my first thing is to look at the open tag, find the close tag. It's right here. But then look here, the open tag for strong isn't closed till after the paragraph. This strong close tag should be before that so that it's properly nested. And then I'm looking at this paragraph and noticing there's no close tag at all. So it needs that close tag on there. So the code checker would figure out where those mistakes are and it would notify you so that you could write good code, which would have all of the properly nested tags. So there are more than 100 elements available to choose from when you are typing code. So deciding which elements to use to describe different content may be difficult. That's why it's important to practice code and look at good code. So for example, like this is an example of bad code. Okay, so the span tag is not nested properly with the strong tag. This strong close tag should be before that. And using line breaks in between is also bad code. It's preferred that you would use paragraphs to separate things. So, for example, instead of using a span and a strong tag, you could just use the H1 header. It does the exact same thing. It makes it bold. And then you could use a paragraph to get those line breaks in between. So the bare minimum on your document, you should have doc type HTML or HTML tags at the top and the very bottom to close it out. Then you should have a head tag, open and close, and then you should have a body tag, open and close. Without a doc type and these structural elements, pages will not render properly in every browser. So you at least need those three on every page. Always be sure to use a proper document structure. Doing so keeps pages standard compliant and fully semantic, which refers to coding with meaning, not just presentation. This will help guarantee that pages will be rendered in the way that we intend. So see if you can figure out what's wrong with this. Bad code. It's inside a HTML tag, but there's no head or body tag. These two tags should be wrapped with a body tag. And there should be a head section and a title. Body and then those two elements. So just keep this picture in mind when you're building the structure of your document. Keep your syntax organized. Use lowercase letters within element names, attributes, and values. A good idea, a good rule of thumb is just don't use any capital letters in web design. Remove the / at the end of the self-closing elements, and then use double quotes, no single or completely omitted quotes. Indent nested elements using the tab key on the keyboard. And then keeping to this rule, these rules will help keep your code clean and readable. Again, it's not necessary, but it's the standard that it should be adhered to. So what's wrong with this code here? Well, they've got a capital D in the div. That's one thing. They've used a capital H in the H5 tag. They've used single quotes instead of double quotes. They've got a / on the input tag. That doesn't need to be there. And then they've used capital div at the end, okay? So this code, and they didn't tab anything over or nest it properly so that it looks clean. So the div is wrapping around all of this, which inside of the UL tag, we have another layer nested inside of that. So this visually helps you look at it and say, oh, there's some nested elements in there, rather than looking at this and you're like really confused about what's what. As far as CSS goes, it's best to keep our styles organized in large logical groups. Before each group, add a comment that describes what the styles that follow pertain to. This is for your sake and anyone else who looks at your code. Comments can be single line or as many lines as you see fit. In CSS, comments are created with a /*, and then you write your comment, and then you write a // and it grays it out. It does not show it on your page. So if you go in and you type all your CSS code, somebody else might go in and look at it and be like, what is all that? Obviously header, they'll know what that is, but they might not know what these are. So if you use comments to define everything, then it keeps your code more organized and it allows other people to know what's going on. When using CSS, use multiple lines and spaces. It doesn't matter where all the spaces are, but it's a good idea to put them in there just so that it cleans things up. And I actually like to use separate lines for every selector too. So when writing CSS, it's important to place each selector and declaration on a new line. Any style placed within the selector should be indented. So this is an example of good code, but what I prefer is to even press enter after every single semicolon. That's what I like to do. This is also an example of good code. Okay, using proper class names is essential to keep your code clean and easy to read. Class names should be modular and when possible should pertain to content within an element, not appearance. Class names should resemble the syntax of the CSS language and should always be lowercase and prefer hyphen delimiters versus underscores. Better yet, just don't have either one of those, dashes or underscores. Just use all lowercase. So an example of bad class naming is capital yellow underscore BOX capital. An example of a good class name would be warning dust message, all lowercase. Keep your code condensed by using shorthanded properties and values. Most properties and values have acceptable shorthand alternatives, which you can learn those on the W3 Schools website also. But here's an example. Instead of writing out margin top, margin right, margin bottom, margin left, you can just write margin and it goes in that order, top, right, bottom, left. It saves so much space. All right, so that's basically a summary of how to write proper code. If you want to do a code validator, Dreamweaver has one built in, or you can find one online. I would encourage you to run your HTML files through a code validator just so you can see what's going on, if you have any errors, and if you come across any questions, just let me know.